we need to talk about the sad and perplexing case of Orrin and Orson West. This story starts on a Monday night in December 2020, 4 days before Christmas, the night 4-year-old Orrin and 3-year-old Orson were reported missing. Their adoptive parents, Jacqueline and Trezell West, told officers the boys were last seen in the family's backyard. They were playing with chalk, drawing on the patio, while Trezell said he was gathering firewood. Jacqueline was in the house wrapping gifts. He went inside for a minute. He came back out. The boys were gone. He went around the neighborhood calling for them to no avail. Later, he said he accidentally left the side gate open and worried the boys had walked away. At 6 that night, he gave up the search and reported them missing. The police dogs couldn't find any trace of them in the backyard, as if the air had swallowed them whole. At the time of the disappearance, the family lived in California City, California, known as Cal City to locals. It's about 100 miles north of Los Angeles on the outskirts of the Mojave Desert. At night, at that time of year, temperatures can dip below freezing. And there wasn't a second to waste, and no shortage of volunteers to help look. More than 100 people combed the area, shouting their names and knocking on doors. The only people who weren't there were the Wests. They said the police told them to stay home and wait. Later that night, the search area got a little smaller. It focused on the last place they'd been seen, the West's home. And their neighbors watched as their van was towed, bags of evidence were carried from the house, and the backyard was dug up. According to law enforcement, no suspects had been ruled out, and the Wests were cooperating. But things were about to get even more complicated for Jacqueline and Trezell. But before we get into all that, how about a little family history? The Wests adopted Orrin and Orson in 2019 after taking them in for foster care in 2018. They already had 4 kids of their own, 2 biological and 2 adopted. According to the boys' birth mother, Ryan Dean, she lost custody of Orrin in 2016 after taking him to the hospital for what turned out to be a broken leg. According to her, Orson was later removed from her custody just days after his birth. And she was told this was done because the system believed in keeping siblings together. She told reporters she couldn't explain how Orrin's leg was broken. It happened while she was at work and a relative was babysitting. But she insisted she'd always been a good parent and never had been in trouble with the law. Ryan Dean never regained custody of her children. Jacqueline and Trezell adopted Orrin and Orson while living in Bakersfield. They moved to Cal City just 3 months before the boys were reported missing. Ryan Dean joined the search effort and wasted no time in sharing her personal feelings about Jacqueline and Trezell West. Standing before news reporters and clearly in significant emotional distress, Dean said this: "They did something. I feel like they did something and they know something. They did something. I feel like my kids are somewhere around here. I can feel it." With this, the Wests had virtually no choice but to speak to the media. On Wednesday, December 23rd, 2 days after reporting the boys missing, Jacqueline and Trezell came out of seclusion, stood in the street outside their home, and gave their side of the story.
He thinks you guys did something.
And that's understandable.
What's your response to that?
That's understandable. I would think the same thing.
Yep.
I mean, that's exactly the point. And if we can find our babies, then guess what? That's no. And that's all I want is to find our babies. That's it.
That was the first and to date the only time Jacqueline and Trezell spoke to the media about the boys. Trezell did most of the talking and recalled in detail the story he gave the authorities about collecting wood, wrapping presents, and discovering the children gone. Jacqueline and Trezell acknowledged that police seized evidence from their home, including their cell phones, but claimed they would have been happy to forfeit proof to the authorities without a search warrant. The following Tuesday, December 29th, 2020, the police made an announcement that came as no surprise to anyone following the case. Foul play was suspected in the disappearance of Orrin and Orson West. Over the following weeks, the community of Cal City never gave up on finding the boys. Local businesses and faith communities chipped in to raise more than $100,000 in reward money. Jacqueline and Trezell West, who had by now lost custody of their 4 other children, abandoned their house and moved back to Bakersfield, where they were reported to be living in near total seclusion with Jacqueline's mother. Their old home in Cal City was repeatedly vandalized, and several people broke into it, hoping to find some evidence of what happened to Orrin and Orson. Someone even hung up a sign in front of it. Its message became a rallying cry for the ongoing search for the children. Where are the boys? Law enforcement continued following leads, but by February 2021, there were still no answers. Then, in March, the case took a surprising turn. It was announced that the Bakersfield Police Department was taking over the investigation. They cited the family's historical connection to the area as the primary reason for this decision. In a way, this made sense. After all, the Wests, Orrin and Orson, and the boys' biological family were all from Bakersfield originally. The Wests had only lived in Cal City for 3 months before the boys were reported missing. On the other hand, if Orrin and Orson had gone missing from their backyard in Cal City, wouldn't the case fall under that jurisdiction? It would, if the boys went missing there. But did they? Before the boys were reported missing, neighbors weren't even aware they lived there. No one came forward to say they ever saw them. And when the Bakersfield police took over the case, the question was straightforward. Had Orrin and Orson West ever lived in Cal City? Or did they disappear before the family moved? What was really going on? Almost 2 weeks later, the Bakersfield police served Trezell West's mother, Orrin and Orson's adoptive grandmother, with a search warrant and retrieved undisclosed evidence from her home. But any hope that this turn of events would finally lead to some answers was dashed when the case subsequently entered a long period with no updates from law enforcement. Finally, in March 2022, the district attorney held a press conference, and the news was devastating. Jacqueline and Trezell West had been arrested and charged with the second-degree murder of Orrin and Orson West. For 3 months leading up to their arrest, a grand jury reviewed evidence and heard testimony from dozens of witnesses. The grand jury's decision confirmed everyone's worst suspicions. They believed the 2 little boys had been murdered 3 months before their adoptive parents reported them gone. When asked if Orrin and Orson had ever even lived in Cal City, the DA told reporters that was a question, like so many other questions, that would be answered during their trial. The case has only continued to evolve. The Wests pleaded not guilty to the charges. After their defense team accused the district attorney of spreading false information about the case, a judge granted a gag order, essentially blocking the attorneys from publicly discussing the case. The U.S. justice system promises due process for anyone accused of a crime, and gag orders are usually granted to avoid tainting the jury pool. But the justice system was not finished with Jacqueline and Trezell West. In June of 2022, they were arraigned on additional charges. And this is not unusual since the new evidence and testimony can emerge during an investigation. But the nature of the charges hints at the prosecution's theory about what happened, including the allegation that at least one of their other children witnessed what happened and will be called to testify, according to KGET. In total, they're looking at 7 counts: conspiracy, falsely reporting an emergency, 2 counts of second-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, and 2 counts of child cruelty. And sadly, their bodies have yet to be found. We still have a lot of unanswered questions about the murder of Orrin and Orson West. We have yet to learn the motive for this terrible act or where the murders even occurred. There is much we don't know about the lives of these little boys, but there is no doubt that they were failed by the system on many levels. And we hope the upcoming trial grants Orrin and Orson's family some closure and justice. Thanks for letting us catch you up on this case. If you like getting all the crime in half the time, please remember to hit subscribe and the bell to stay updated on this case and others. Until next time, take care.